Welcome back to the Truth Factory. In psychology, there's a phenomenon known as the illusory truth effect, which simply put is the tendency to believe information more when it's been repeated. The more familiar you are with something, the more you'll identify with it. Familiar information is easier for our brains to process, and repeated information is more likely to be believed as fact, regardless of if it is. This effect can be used to manipulate or gaslight people into believing statements or events, simply by saying it enough times in a convincing way. In a 2012 experiment, participants were repeatedly exposed to fake news stories. Some participants became so convinced that these stories were real that they claimed to have false memories that they had heard or read about them previously. The study concluded that repetitive false claims increase the believability of fake news. In a 2015 study, researchers discovered that familiarity can overpower rationality, and that repeatedly hearing a certain fact is wrong can affect listeners' beliefs. Even when participants already know the correct answer, they could be persuaded to believe otherwise through repetition of lies. Because of the power this process has on the human mind, the illusory truth effect plays a significant role in election campaigns, advertising, news media, and political propaganda. This effect is so profound that it's not hard to fathom why the CIA or the deep state would want to control the media. In the past, the CIA created Operation Mockingbird, which manipulated the media to influence public opinion through the use of covert propaganda.
Do you have any people paid by the CIA who are working for television networks?
This, I think, gets into the kind of getting into the details, Mr. Chairman, that I'd like to get into in executive session.
It's not unimaginable that they would have a similar operation in effect today, because by manipulating the media, you can manipulate the masses. And I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with having a specific angle on a news story. I'm saying it's wrong to intentionally flat-out lie to the public in an orchestrated attempt to brainwash them.
In terms of how Russia used that particular weapon.
Russians, the Russian government, clearly from Putin himself,
Kremlin.
Quoting from WikiLeaks. And what's really important about WikiLeaks is that
Russian WikiLeaks.
let's say WikiLeaks, same thing.
Russian interference.
The Russians.
We know that Russian agents Russians posed as Russian trolls and bots.
We have Julian Assange and WikiLeaks and Russian trolls and bots.
For example, to convince an entire population that Hillary Clinton lost the election because of Russian bots requires total media control and mind-bending mental gymnastics, because we know that Hillary actually lost the election simply for being a dumpster fire of a person. But regardless of how asinine their lies are, due to their reach and how many times they've repeated it, people will believe them. Fortunately, there's an information revolution taking place online by freethinkers who are sick of being force-fed these false narratives. We're the counterculture, and our weapons are memes. And although they're trying to actively shut us down, they're trying to silence us, they're trying to censor us, control our narrative, and they're trying to infiltrate our forums to suppress us, they can't. Because with every meme we post and every GIF we make and every hashtag we tweet out, it's a middle finger to the mainstream narrative. The same narrative that's trying to convince you that Russian bots are the reason that Trump won the election. Well, I guess that makes us all Russian bots then.
They came back and told that it was because I was a part of a Russian operative, that I was somehow working for Russia, or part of the Russian bots that were sending out negative information during the election. My account was getting over 2 million views per month. My Twitter platform was specifically about politics. I made it clear that that was what my agenda was, that I really wanted to be able to share, to counter the negative information or the propaganda that mainstream media was espousing to all of our viewers, or our electorate, if you will. And that's not something they want to hear.
The Russian narrative was concocted out of desperation as an excuse for losing the election that they thought would be a cakewalk. And now that they're back backed into the corner, they have no other moves but to double down on this Russia, Russia, Russia narrative, which makes them sound like special needs children who lost their earmuffs. And now their world is crashing down around them, because despite the millions of dollars spent in propaganda to push their fake news stories, all of their lies, the paid riots, the far left screechings, at the end of the day, all of this nonsense that has been pushed out from the fake news media is just a projection of the Democrats' own misdeeds, and Hillary Clinton will never be president. And now that the memo is set to be released to the American public, we'll know the truth, which could make Watergate look like child's play. Because while lawmakers have not given any specifics of the 4-page FISA memo, in a recent interview with Trey Gowdy, he did drop some major breadcrumbs. He alleged that the dossier was paid for by the DNC and that Christopher Steele had previous connections to Hillary Clinton.
That the Democrat National Committee paid for material that was never vetted, that was included in a court proceeding. Do you want to know whether or not the primary source in these court proceedings had a bias against one candidate? Do you want to know whether or not he said he'd do anything to keep that candidate from becoming elected president?
Between this and the Peter Strzok, Lisa Page texts that show not only were they colluding with journalists to push out specific narratives, but that they were actively trying to destroy the democratically elected president of the United States. Because the fact that Peter Strzok was even on Mueller's team compromises the entire investigation. Right now, we're in a Tetris game and we have our blocks stacked perfectly. We're just waiting for that one last piece to bury the Democrats and this glass wonder bitch once and for all. And in celebration of that, here is a Russian bot Tetris remix. Have a great night. Mew!
The Russian government has engaged in espionage, clearly from Putin himself. The Russian government has engaged in
internet folks, the Russians and their troll farms and their internet folks, pushing them out from their troll farms as much as they could. And their troll farms, internet folks, troll farms, troll farms, start hashtagging out
Russian bots,
internet folks,
espionage,
Russian bots, because Russian bots are pushing their narrative out there.
The Russians, let's say WikiLeaks, same thing.
We have Julian Assange and WikiLeaks.
Quoting from WikiLeaks, and what's really important about WikiLeaks
and Russian trolls and bots
is that against Americans. This has come from the highest levels of the Russian government, clearly from Putin himself.
Russian bots,
internet folks,
espionage.
The question is, where and how did the Russians get into this? They did it through the algorithms. They did it through the algorithms, false news sites. They did it through the algorithms, through machine learning, which kept spewing out the algorithms that they developed. Now, algorithms.
Hashtag whatever the GOP narrative is.